The remote island of Flores, Southeast Asia, has one of the most bizarre ecosystems in the world. Inhabited by elephants, giant rats, and the deadly Komodo dragon, it is also the location of one of the most astounding archaeological discoveries in history. In 2001, a team of archaeologists traveled to the island and began excavating deep in a cave called Liang Bor.
Researchers started excavating at Liang Bua, this limestone cave on Flores, Indonesia. And during the first 2 years of excavation, they found some small bits of human bone, but they weren't sure exactly what it was.
But then in 2003, they discovered more remains. This time, it was a complete skeleton of a 30-year-old female named LB1. Carbon dating said she lived around 18,000 years ago. What confounded experts was that she was unlike any other human being ever found.
In looking at our species, it certainly does not fit in. If it was a member of our species, it would be very strange.
The reason was astonishing. She was only around 3 feet tall, almost 2.5 feet shorter than a modern North American woman.
It's a very small individual. It was around 3 foot, maybe a bit less than 3 feet in height.
This remarkable discovery led this tiny, full-grown human specimen to be nicknamed the Hobbit. Was science fiction becoming science fact? Legend or not, it's extraordinary, undeniable evidence on an Indonesian island of a fully grown human only 3 feet tall. How could this happen? Matt Tucheri is a paleoanthropologist, an expert in ancient people. He believes one possible reason for their tiny size could be related to a phenomena called island dwarfism.
Island dwarfism is a description of a phenomena where, in some cases, on islands, say, or other ecological settings that are isolated, that some animals get larger and other animals get smaller. So rats and small animals tend to get larger, mostly because of access to resources as it relates to fertility. So, if there's only so much food, you're better off to be smaller because then you can have more offspring. We don't know for sure if it happened in terms of the hobbits. It may have, but it may not have. Basically, the hobbit stands about 1 meter tall. And so that's quite small for a full-grown adult. And we haven't really seen body sizes of that, normal body sizes of that height for a long period of time in human evolution, going back more than 2 million years ago. So to find something like that, when we actually thought that sort of our body size increase, and particularly our lengthening of our legs, was a big part of our human evolutionary story, that to find something that doesn't fit into that and yet coexisted with us is really quite strange.
But why did these remarkable creatures disappear? What happened to them? Some theorize the Hobbit may have become extinct because they were eaten by the island's Komodo dragon population. Not nice.
The Komodo dragon was a part of the hobbits, there's no question, just like it is the life of people that live on Komodo and Rincha today. Did the hobbits go after Komodo dragons, or did the Komodo dragon go after the hobbits? These are questions that will continue to be answered. These are all possibilities. We're just not sure exactly how it played out.
But whatever their fate, this extraordinary discovery confronted scientists with an amazing possibility. Our human evolutionary history is incomplete, and the Hobbit is an entire new species.
Well, the discovery on Flores has certainly broadened our understanding of human evolution. Does it change any of the general themes of what we've known? Not really. But it does show us that we come from a very diverse family tree, and that some of those branches of that tree subsisted for a lot longer than we thought previously. Generally, we thought things like Homo floresiensis went extinct 1 million or 2 million years ago, and yet now we see them living very well on an isolated island in Indonesia up until even 18,000 years ago, when modern humans are definitely in the near area.
Knowing that there was a totally different early human species living on Earth, coexisting with us, that looks so different than us, is something that was really mind-blowing to the scientific community. Well, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I think it adds a real level of diversity to our family tree, and seeing something that in some ways looks so primitive, that is so recent in time, is really this great experiment in being human.
No matter what you thought it was, it's just an incredible find. I remember when it was first announced, many scientists, including myself, were very skeptical about it. I mean, could this really be real? But over time, the evidence has just been consistently presented that shows us that, yeah, this is legitimate, different species than our own.
Whilst the discovery of the Hobbit excited many scientists, others were less convinced.
I had a different viewpoint on this from the outset, because when I read that first paper about the skeleton, it just didn't fit. And so I looked for an alternative explanation.
So is the Hobbit skull just a lone example? Matt Tocheri is a paleoanthropologist, an expert in ancient people. Matt has studied bones of the Hobbit's wrist. He believes the unique structure is proof that this is a new species.
The reasons why I think it's a different species stem largely from my own research, which happens to be on the evolution of the wrist in humans and our close relatives, the great apes. So there's been some big changes to our wrist in the last million years. Well, Homo floresiensis doesn't show those changes. And so that basically says to me that it must be descended from an ancestor prior to that a million years ago, because it doesn't share the derived anatomy we see in us and Neanderthals.
Matt found that a key bone in the Hobbit's wrist is different to modern humans and more similar to a chimpanzee or ape. He believes this means that the Hobbit is in fact a new and unknown species of human cousin.
In terms of the wrist evidence, you can see that it's remarkably similar to what we see in chimpanzees. Now, that doesn't mean it's more closely related to a chimpanzee, because the hobbits share anatomy with modern humans and Neanderthals that chimpanzees don't. But what the wrist shows to us is that it retains the anatomy of the primitive hominin, and so it must have branched off prior to this new morphology evolving. And that's pretty amazing.
This compelling evidence was presented to the world scientific community. Since there were portions of other Hobbit skeletons found, they classified it as its own species with the Latin name Homo florensis. But anthropologist Robert Martin has a different theory to explain the mystery of the Hobbit.
This skull is really quite unusual. The skeleton is quite unusual, and so you can understand why people said it must be a new species. It's a very unusual individual.
Martin believes the Hobbit's inclusion into our evolutionary history was based on too little evidence. Archaeologists only recovered one skull among all the skeletal remains.
And the point I really want to emphasize is that we have fragments of other individuals, but we only have one skull. If they had found 2 or 3 or 4 skulls that were all the same, it would be much more difficult to argue. We should be very, very careful about basing huge interpretations on single specimens.
Dr. Martin feels the skull isn't consistent with our evolutionary history. He believes its small size raises a big problem. The Hobbit's skeleton is nearly 18,000 years old. If what we know about human evolution is true, the Hobbit's brain should be larger than it is.
You have to go back 3 million years to find a brain this small. But over the last 3 million years, the brain has got bigger in every other single hominid except this one, so that's a problem. If we look at all of the known hominid skulls and plot out the brain size, you get a very nice curve. And the only thing that doesn't fit is this hobbit from Flores.
Martin has an amazing theory of his own. He suggests that the Hobbit skeleton actually belongs to a modern human from Flores who suffered from a congenital disease known as microcephalia.
And microcephalic simply means small head. It is a developmental abnormality. It's the cast of the skull of a modern human, microcephalic, small-brained modern human. And this brain is exactly the same size as in the Hobbit.
Another convincing piece of evidence is that this disease also has another side effect. It produces a small body, just like the hobbits. So the mystery deepens. Is it possible that the world's scientific community is wrong about the hobbit? Dr. Brianna Pobina is an education specialist from the Smithsonian Institute. She believes the hobbit is just one of many previously undiscovered species, and more will likely be found.
New fossils are being found all the time. They often fit very well into the early human family tree. At least 3 other species of early humans have shared the Earth with our species, Homo sapiens. Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, or Neanderthals, and Homo floresiensis, the hobbit. Potentially, this new species found in southern Siberia, this pinky bone, could have even been a 4th species.
One of the ways they've determined this pinky bone belonged to a new species was by examining its DNA. Recent technological advances make it possible to sequence the genes of long-extinct species. But mysteriously, the hobbit's DNA has never been examined. Why? It turns out the original DNA samples were damaged. And more bizarre, since the first scientific paper was published, no one has been granted access to the original skeleton.
The specimen has been kept pretty much under wraps by the discoverers, and I requested access to CAT scans, CT scans to check this out, and I was refused access. You're not allowed to publish if you don't make the material accessible to other scientists.
Despite the debate, Homo floresiensis, aka the hobbit, is now widely accepted as a new human species.
There's a lot about human evolution that's still a mystery. In a way, it's like putting together the pieces of a puzzle. In the last 10 or 15 years, we've had an unprecedented amount of discoveries that tell us that the human family tree extends back about double the amount of time that we initially thought, that the number of human species on the family tree is about double the number that we originally thought. So these finds, these new genetic finds, the fossils, the archaeological evidence, really is filling out the human family tree, shedding light on some of the darker mysteries of human evolution.
Hobbits might indeed have existed, but their true origins may remain a mystery forever.
What the fuck?